I think I didn't do anything wrong, just what any ambitious woman would do on a business trip. But when the restaurant lights dimmed at our anniversary, the projector clicked, and the screen showed me in that hotel hallway. Then my husband slid a folder across the table, his hand steady, his plan already lawful and complete. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the family calendar, the red circle around our anniversary date looking more like a warning than a celebration. I told myself it was just another dinner, just another ritual, nothing special. Caleb had suggested keeping it simple this year, maybe a quiet evening with Noah. But I brushed that off as his usual lack of ambition. He never understood that appearances mattered, that people judged not just who you were, but how you were seen. My phone buzzed with an email about a business trip, the kind of opportunity I had been waiting for. Martin Hale, our regional sales director, wanted me on the team traveling to Warsaw for a presentation. I told Caleb it was mandatory, that HR specifically requested my presence, even though the truth was it was Martin's idea. Caleb frowned, asked why he hadn't heard about it sooner, and I told him he was imagining problems where none existed. I framed his concern as insecurity, told him he was holding me back, and hinted that maybe he didn't want me to succeed. He looked hurt but said nothing, and I considered that a small victory. Jenna, my younger sister, loved the news. She called me a boss woman, told me I was finally stepping into the role I deserved, and posted a story about breaking ceilings with a wink. I laughed with her, ignoring the message from Oksana, my mother-in-law, who worried Noah's routines would be disrupted. Caleb's mother always had an opinion, always thought she knew best. She told Caleb to keep receipts, to protect himself, which I thought was ridiculous. Sergei, my father, had the opposite reaction. He said Caleb should just send me flowers and let me shine, that men needed to accept strong wives. I knew he only wanted peace at the table, the same as always. At work, Martin praised my visibility, told me I had leadership qualities, and said the trip would put me on the shortlist for promotion. He had that polished smile that made people feel special, and I let myself believe every word. I convinced myself he saw something in me Caleb never did. When Caleb asked about the late-night preparation sessions, I said it was part of the job, that he should be proud his wife was wanted. He asked if anyone else was staying behind with me, and I rolled my eyes, telling him he sounded jealous. I reminded him that men played golf or drank at bars to network, but women had to be present to say yes. He didn't argue after that. I left Noah's bedtime to Caleb more often that week. He read him stories, cooked simple meals, and tucked him in while I rehearsed in front of the mirror. Sometimes I caught Noah looking at me, as if wondering why I was leaving again, but I told myself he was resilient, that children adapted. Jenna sent me outfits to try, messaging that confidence was half the battle. I ignored the growing silence between Caleb and me, telling myself silence was better than arguments. The day before the trip, Caleb asked if I would call every night. I told him I'd try, but the schedule would be demanding. He nodded without looking at me, his jaw tight, and I told myself he was sulking. I complained to Jenna that he was trying to guilt-trip me, and she said he was just afraid I would outgrow him. I liked that phrase, outgrow him. It made me feel taller somehow. The evening before my flight, I deliberately forgot to arrange a babysitter for Noah's school pickup. When Caleb asked who was covering, I feigned surprise and said he'd have to manage. He sighed but agreed. I told him it was important to be flexible if he wanted me to succeed. In truth, I liked watching him scramble. It made me feel in control. As I packed my suitcase, I thought about the red circle on the calendar. Our anniversary fell 2 days after my return, and I imagined myself walking into the restaurant, radiant from success, with Martin's words echoing in my mind. I pictured everyone toasting me, finally recognizing that Caleb should be grateful. I promised myself I would make the night about us, but I knew it would be about me. I snapped the suitcase shut, my tickets already upgraded to business class by Martin, which I told myself was standard for the role. When the airport car arrived, Caleb helped load my bag, but said nothing else. He kissed Noah on the head, not me. I checked my phone and saw a message from Martin. Lobby, 10 p.m., debrief before tomorrow. My heart raced, not with guilt but with the thrill of being chosen. I smiled at the screen, deleted the preview so Caleb wouldn't notice, and pocketed the phone. As the car pulled away, I glanced back at the apartment window where Noah's shadow leaned against the glass. I told myself he would forget by morning. I told myself Caleb would get over it, and I told myself that everything happening was exactly what I deserved. But deep inside, I felt a small crack of unease, a whisper that I ignored. The airport buzzed with movement, announcements echoing over polished floors, travelers rushing past with their rolling bags, and I felt like I belonged among them. Important, busy, untouchable. I told myself this was proof of growth, proof that I had stepped into a new category of people. The kind who didn't stay home and worry about groceries or school pickups. When I found my seat on the plane, Martin was already there, greeting me with a smile that felt practiced but flattering. He asked about my presentation slides, and I told him I was confident, though I secretly craved his reassurance. He leaned close, saying my initiative was what separated leaders from the rest, and I let the words wrap around me like armor. I imagined Caleb at home making Noah's dinner, and instead of guilt, I felt a sharp sense of superiority, as though his grounded presence was proof of his smallness compared to my ascent. At the hotel lobby the next evening, Martin suggested a late-night debrief after the team dinner, his voice casual but loaded with subtext. I hesitated for a second, but I told myself it was just about work. Just another step to secure my place in the circle that decided promotions. The lobby gleamed under soft lights, and the security cameras perched high in the corners caught every angle, though I hardly noticed them at the time. We sat for drinks, and Martin's hand lingered on my shoulder a little too long, the gesture subtle but unmistakable. I told myself it was harmless, that it was nothing more than mentorship, that Caleb would twist it into something ugly only because he didn't understand. When Martin suggested continuing the conversation upstairs, I framed it as an extension of networking, something men did all the time without anyone judging. I convinced myself intentions mattered more than appearances, and since I had no feelings, there could be no consequences. Later that night, in the dim hallway, our keycards chirped almost back to back, two small flashes of light that the cameras caught in silence. I saw the red dot blink on the ceiling camera as I walked quickly down the carpeted corridor, my scarf trailing behind me like a flag. I told myself no one would ever check those recordings, no one would ever connect the dots, and even if they did, what would they really see? Just two colleagues talking, perhaps entering rooms at the same time, nothing more. I ignored the whisper of risk in the back of my mind, pushing it down beneath layers of rationalization. The next morning, Martin avoided being alone with me. At breakfast, he sat with another manager, his laugh forced, his eyes sliding away when I entered. When he finally spoke, he said my initiative would be remembered, and I clung to that as proof that the night had served its purpose. I told myself I had made a strategic move, nothing personal, nothing emotional, just business. But I noticed the shift, the way he suddenly treated me like a liability rather than an asset, and I dismissed it, choosing to believe I had secured a stronger position anyway. I called Caleb briefly that night, telling him the meetings were exhausting and that I could barely keep my eyes open. He asked if everything was okay, and I answered with irritation, accusing him of doubting me again. I said he should trust me, that he was making me feel suffocated, and then I cut the call short before he could say more. Later, Jenna messaged me with a laughing emoji, asking if I was sealing the deal. I didn't reply, but her words fed into the narrative I had built for myself, that I was playing the game everyone else already knew existed, that I was finally doing what others lacked the courage to admit. As I rolled my suitcase through the lobby on checkout morning, I caught sight of a small placard near the front desk. It read, "Notice, CCTV cameras in operation. All footage stored in accordance with policy." A uniformed security guard walked past me carrying a sealed envelope labeled with a date and time, and for a split second, my stomach tightened. I quickly brushed it aside, convincing myself it was routine, nothing to do with me, just hotel protocol. I told myself no one cared about harmless coincidences, that surveillance was for thieves and drunks, not professionals like me. On the flight home, I practiced what I would tell Caleb. I would say the trip was grueling, that Martin praised my presentation, that my colleagues respected me more than ever. If Caleb hinted at suspicion, I planned to counter with accusations of his insecurity, reminding him of how men's clubs and golf outings worked. I would call his concerns outdated, proof that he wanted to keep me small. I rehearsed lines in my head, even imagined how I'd share snippets with Jenna to reinforce the story. By the time we landed, I had built a perfect shield of explanations, ready to deflect anything. But as I collected my bag and saw Martin walk quickly in the opposite direction without saying goodbye, I felt a flicker of doubt. He had promised my initiative would be remembered, yet he wouldn't even make eye contact. I ignored it, telling myself he was just being careful, that men like him had reputations to protect. I convinced myself this was proof I was in his league, someone worth caution. At home, Noah ran to hug me, his small hands clutching my coat. I patted his head absent-mindedly, already thinking about the slideshow I would prepare for our anniversary dinner. I planned to highlight my trip, the photos of polished meeting rooms, the group dinners, the evidence of my importance. I would show everyone how far I had come, and Caleb would have no choice but to admit he was married to someone who mattered. I believed the story was still in my control, but I didn't notice the way Caleb watched me that evening, his eyes calm, his phone in his hand, as if he already knew what strings were tangled behind my polished presentation. The days after I returned from the trip felt like a stage where I was the main performer, and I wanted every audience member to see Caleb as the weak husband, holding me back while I played the ambitious wife pushing forward. In the office kitchen, I laughed with a coworker about how Caleb had texted me too many times during the trip, saying he worried when I didn't answer late at night. I told them he was fragile, insecure, and jealous, and they nodded politely, though I noticed one of them glance at the floor instead of joining in the laughter. I shared screenshots in a group chat with Jenna and 2 friends, showing Caleb's short, worried messages next to my dismissive replies. They joked about how men never understood women's grind, and I leaned into that story, telling myself it was true, that Caleb was just dragging his feet while I soared. At home, I began planning the anniversary dinner with more energy than I had given our marriage in months. I booked the trendy bistro with a private room, making sure the guest list leaned heavily on people who admired me, Jenna, a few colleagues, even my father. Sergei immediately offered to cover the deposit, saying it was important to celebrate milestones. Oksana, however, was wary. She told Caleb that she didn't like the idea of me making speeches that painted him small, and she made it clear she wouldn't attend if I intended to embarrass him. I rolled my eyes when Caleb told me this, saying his mother never liked me anyway, and that her opinion didn't matter. I framed it as her being controlling, another person trying to stop me from shining. Noah noticed the tension, even if he couldn't name it. One night he asked why I missed bedtime so often, and I told him I was working hard to give him the best future. Caleb stayed quiet, reading the boy a story while I typed an outline for my anniversary toast. I had already chosen the photos for the slideshow, images of me at conferences, at the Warsaw Hotel lobby, at the airport with colleagues, all carefully curated to make me look important. Caleb appeared in only 1 or 2, always in the background or cropped. I told myself this was fair, that he never tried to be part of my achievements, so why pretend? Meanwhile, Caleb's silence thickened around me like fog. He no longer asked where I was going, no longer complained about my late hours, and at first I thought I had finally worn him down. In truth, I began to sense something colder in his calm. He would watch me without speaking, his phone always nearby, his eyes scanning me as if he was recording more than listening. I brushed it off, telling Jenna that he was just sulking, just waiting for me to trip over my own success, so he could say, "I told you so." She laughed and said he should be grateful for a wife people admired, and I clung to her validation like proof. One afternoon, a sealed envelope arrived addressed to Caleb. I noticed it on the counter, thick and official-looking, and I asked him about it. He said it was nothing, just bills, and slid it between some books on the shelf. I let it go, though a small unease tugged at me. Later, I saw him scanning through receipts, bank statements, and what looked like childcare logs, photographing them with his phone before tucking them away. I told myself he was just obsessing, finding busy work to distract himself from feeling left behind. I told myself I had no reason to worry because I was the one steering the story, not him. That evening, I showed Jenna my draft toast, where I planned to joke about Caleb being cautious while I was brave, about how he kept our family grounded while I reached higher. She clapped and said it would be a hit on social media, especially with the slideshow. She even drafted a cheeky caption for her feed. "Behind every strong woman is a man trying not to fall asleep at the table." I laughed, imagining the room applauding me while Caleb sat quiet, exposed. I didn't think about what it might do to him because I believed humiliation was just part of making people finally see me as the one in control. But Caleb was not idle. I caught a glimpse of his phone screen one night, and the name Koval flashed at the top of a message thread. The line I saw read, "I have the footage and timestamps. Proceed as discussed." My stomach jolted, but I forced a smile, pretending I hadn't noticed. He deleted the message before I could ask, and when I finally did, he said it was work-related. I told myself I had misread it, that he was bluffing, that he had nothing solid. I convinced myself I could still spin whatever he thought he had into insecurity or manipulation. The night before the dinner, I rehearsed my toast in front of the mirror, smoothing my dress and practicing the pauses for laughter. Caleb watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his face unreadable. I asked if he was excited for the celebration, and he only said he was ready. I laughed at his deadpan tone, brushing it off as more of his sulking, and told him he'd thank me when he saw how impressed everyone was. Inside, though, a flicker of doubt spread, but I drowned it with more rehearsing, more planning, more certainty that the story was mine to tell. As I finalized the slideshow on my laptop, I added one last photo of me standing beside a glossy banner at the Warsaw event, the image of success. I deleted a candid of Caleb and Noah baking cookies at home, deciding it didn't fit the image I wanted. The screen glowed with the version of life I had created, and I smiled at it like it was the truth. When I closed the laptop, Caleb was looking at me, his expression calm, too calm, and I felt for the first time that maybe he knew more than I wanted him to. But I told myself he couldn't prove anything, and even if he tried, I was ready with words to turn the blame back on him. I was certain I would walk into that restaurant as the star of the evening, never suspecting the spotlight would shift before I could finish my toast. The restaurant glowed with soft golden lights, the private room buzzing with chatter as guests found their seats, glasses clinking, and laughter spilling into the air. I had chosen the bistro carefully, its reputation for elegance, fitting for the narrative I wanted to craft. The long table was decorated with candles and flowers, the slideshow screen waiting in the corner like a stage prop, and I felt every eye on me as I smoothed my dress and prepared to deliver the night I had envisioned. Jenna hovered nearby with her phone ready, eager to capture every moment for her followers, while Sergei adjusted his tie and told me he was proud. Caleb sat quietly at the far end, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Oksana had come only out of obligation, sitting stiff beside Noah, who colored in a book rather than watch the adults. I told myself none of that mattered. Tonight was about me, about showing the circle of family and colleagues that I was the rising star and Caleb the cautious anchor, barely holding on. When it was time for toasts, I stood confidently, raising my glass and launching into the speech I had rehearsed so many times. I spoke about challenges, about courage, about how marriage was a balance between one person's grounding and the other's bravery. I joked lightly about Caleb being risk-averse, saying he was the reason I didn't miss paying bills while I was the one seizing opportunities. A few people chuckled politely, though Oksana's face hardened, and Caleb's silence hung heavier than laughter could mask. I pressed on, clicking the remote to begin the slideshow. The screen filled with glossy images of me in Warsaw, me at panels, me shaking hands with managers, every photo carefully selected to elevate my presence. Caleb appeared only once, blurred in the background of a family shot, and I laughed, saying he preferred to be behind the curtain rather than on stage. Some clapped, some smiled awkwardly, but I told myself they admired me, that they envied what I had built. As the applause faded, Caleb rose slowly, adjusting his jacket. He thanked everyone for coming in, a calm, even tone that made my stomach tighten, though I didn't understand why. He said there was one more clip to share, something important to mark the night. He nodded to the staff, and I watched in confusion as the waiter dimmed the lights further and switched the projector input. The slideshow vanished, replaced by grainy hotel hallway footage. At first, the room was silent, unsure what they were seeing, until the timestamp and the camera angle revealed a familiar scarf trailing as a woman walked down the carpeted corridor. My breath caught as the shapes became clear, two figures entering rooms within minutes of each other, gestures unmistakable, captured without sound but heavy with implication. My scarf, my outline, Martin's hand on my shoulder as the elevator doors opened. Gasps rippled across the table. Jenna's phone lowered slowly, her mouth open. Sergei looked from the screen to me, his face pale, while Oksana's eyes narrowed with a grim satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. Noah kept coloring, oblivious to the shift, though Caleb leaned slightly toward him, shielding him from the sudden silence. My first instinct was to laugh it off, to frame it as innocent coincidence, to say the footage showed nothing more than late-night preparations. But the room's mood had already shifted, the evidence too blunt, the silence too thick. I felt the spotlight that I had craved turn scorching, no longer admiration but exposure. I tried to speak, to tell them it was a misunderstanding, but before I could gather words, the door opened and a man in a suit entered. He carried a sealed packet, his voice neutral as he asked to confirm my identity. Every eye turned as I nodded numbly, and he placed the documents on the table before me, with a simple statement that they had been served. The papers bore Caleb's name alongside mine, bold titles declaring separation and custody petitions, financial orders, and requests for exclusive residence rights. I touched the envelope with shaking fingers, trying to summon anger, trying to convince myself it was a stunt. But Caleb didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He simply sat down again, his expression calm, as if every move had been rehearsed long before tonight. Jenna looked at me with wide eyes, unsure whether to defend or retreat. Sergei mumbled something about privacy, asking if this needed to happen here, but no one moved. Oksana placed a steadying hand on Noah's shoulder, as though nothing surprised her. The candles flickered, the projector screen froze on the still image of my scarf caught mid-swing, and the humiliation pressed down heavier than applause ever had. I tried to recover, saying Caleb was overreacting, saying hotel footage meant nothing, that colleagues often traveled together. But my voice cracked, and no one rushed to support me. The room, once mine, had turned against me, and I felt for the first time that control was no longer in my hands. I looked at Caleb, waiting for him to lash out, but he only stared back with that same quiet resolve, his silence sharper than any accusation. The night I had designed to elevate me had collapsed, leaving me exposed, my story rewritten in real time before friends, family, and colleagues. And when I thought it couldn't get worse, Caleb raised his glass again, not to me but to truth, thanking everyone for their time and asking the staff to bring dessert. The room stirred uneasily, the celebration over, the spotlight fixed not on my success but on my unraveling. And though I tried to smile, to hold the mask in place, the weight of the papers on the table made my hands tremble. I knew the story had shifted, and for the first time, I had no script to follow. The restaurant emptied with a strange silence, guests leaving quickly, avoiding my eyes, some whispering as they passed. I stayed seated, the sealed packet heavy in my lap, telling myself Caleb was only trying to humiliate me, that none of it would hold up if I just kept calm. But when we got home, he didn't argue, didn't shout. Instead, he placed another folder on the counter, thick with receipts, bank statements, and copies of Noah's school notes. He said nothing, only slid them toward me before walking into the bedroom with our son. I stood frozen, my mind racing for explanations, ready to spin another story, but for the first time I realized he wasn't listening anymore. The next morning, I went into work determined to regain control. I told myself I would frame Caleb as vindictive, using surveillance to twist innocent images. I rehearsed lines about how my boss was just mentoring me, about how late-night meetings were normal in business culture. But as soon as I entered the building, HR called me into a conference room. Mira Petrov, our HR partner, sat with her laptop open, her tone clipped as she asked me to explain the trip. She had received a formal complaint, supported by footage and keycard records. I tried to insist nothing inappropriate had happened, that it was a smear campaign by a jealous husband. But the evidence was too precise. Timestamps, expenses, even a forwarded screenshot of my group chat mocking Caleb. I stammered about jokes and context, but Mira's expression didn't change. She told me I would be temporarily reassigned while the matter was reviewed, and Martin had already been placed on administrative leave. My throat went dry, my rehearsed defenses crumbling faster than I expected. I called Jenna that afternoon, furious, insisting Caleb had crossed a line by dragging my career into our personal problems. She told me to hold strong, to call it professional sabotage, but even her voice lacked its usual confidence. When I called my father, Sergei told me to calm down, that adults made mistakes, that the family needed privacy. He said I should think of Noah first, not my pride. His neutrality felt like betrayal. Oksana, of course, sent a curt message saying this was the consequence of dishonesty, and that Caleb was doing the right thing protecting his child. For the first time, I felt the family split clearly around me, lines I couldn't erase with words. By the end of the week, Caleb had already met with his attorney, Dmytro Koval. I received notice of temporary orders, separation filing, parenting schedules, restrictions on joint spending. My credit cards no longer worked. The accounts I used for shopping had been frozen. I tried to accuse Caleb of cruelty, but the paperwork was signed, stamped, and entirely lawful. He had prepared every detail, consulting professionals while I wasted my time on appearances. I tried to confront him that evening, saying he was tearing the family apart, that Noah needed stability, that this was revenge disguised as order. He looked at me with the same calm as at the restaurant and said the court would decide what stability meant. His words carried no anger, only certainty, and that cut deeper than shouting ever could. When I checked my email late that night, I saw a formal notice from HR confirming I was removed from Martin's reporting line. My reputation, my carefully built image, was unraveling piece by piece, and no one was defending me. Martin hadn't contacted me once since the footage played. My allies fell silent. My story, the one where I was the brave woman outgrowing a fragile husband, no longer held. I sat alone in the dark, clutching papers I couldn't argue with, and for the first time, I wondered if Caleb had already won without saying another word. The courthouse felt sterile, its pale walls and fluorescent lights stripping away any sense of glamour I had once surrounded myself with. I walked in wearing my best suit, determined to look composed, rehearsing lines in my head about misunderstandings, about overreactions, about how Caleb had humiliated me unfairly. But when the clerk called our case, I realized quickly this was not a stage for my performance. Caleb sat with his attorney, papers neatly stacked, his expression calm and steady. I sat across the room, my own lawyer whispering last-minute reminders, though my pulse drowned out most of his words. The judge began with the evidence. Time-stamped footage, hotel keycard records, financial statements, and the group chat screenshots. My lawyer argued context, said nothing explicit was proven, said Caleb had weaponized optics to create scandal. I nodded along, telling myself the judge would see through it. But the judge remained impassive, focusing only on what could be verified. The footage showed late-night meetings that crossed professional boundaries, the expenses confirmed shared charges, the chat logs displayed ridicule of my husband. Piece by piece, the narrative I had tried to spin crumbled under the weight of documented fact. When it was my turn to speak, I claimed Caleb's actions were vindictive, that he had chosen to serve papers at our anniversary dinner out of spite. I said it was emotional cruelty, an attempt to destroy my image before friends and colleagues. But the judge interrupted, reminding me that the question here was not about social appearances, but about the best interests of our child and the stability of finances. My words faltered. I tried to bring up Noah, insisting he needed both parents together, but the judge countered with a sharp reminder that Noah needed stability more than performances of unity. Oksana sat in the back, her gaze unwavering, as if she had expected this outcome from the beginning. Sergei avoided my eyes, clearly exhausted by the spectacle. Jenna wasn't even there. Her silence since the dinner had grown louder each day. For the first time, I felt entirely alone, without allies, without an audience to applaud my excuses. The ruling came swiftly. Caleb was granted primary weekday custody of Noah, with neutral exchange locations and mandatory co-parenting classes for both of us. Joint discretionary spending remained frozen, financial disclosures required within 30 days, and all communication was to be documented. My lawyer leaned close and whispered that these were temporary orders, not final, but the word temporary offered no comfort. They were orders all the same, stamped and binding, reshaping my life in ways I couldn't undo. Parallel to the court's decisions, HR had finalized its stance. A letter entered the record confirming I was reassigned, separated from Martin's line, while Martin remained on leave pending investigation. The room buzzed with the quiet shuffle of papers as these points were read aloud, each one a nail sealing the version of events I could no longer control. Caleb thanked the judge, gathered his documents, and left the courtroom without once looking triumphant. He didn't need to. His dignity was intact, his actions lawful, his silence more powerful than any argument I had prepared. As I sat clutching my lawyer's notes, I realized there would be no applause for me. No sympathetic nods, only the stark reality of orders I couldn't erase with words. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air felt heavier than it should have. I tried to call Jenna, but the line went unanswered. I considered drafting a post to explain everything, to salvage some narrative, but no one was asking for my version anymore. When we returned to the apartment for the custody exchange, Caleb knelt down to Noah's level, telling him it was time to go home. I stood in the doorway, the stamped orders in my hand, watching them walk away together. The door closed softly, leaving me with silence that no excuse could fill. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.